Welcome to True Reddit Reads, where real-life stories are told by those who have stayed silent for far too long. Today, you're about to hear a shocking, heartbreaking, and intensely gripping story about a young girl forced into beauty pageants from an age far too young, enduring grueling training, strict diets, and being pushed to the brink of her limits by her own mother. A journey both haunting and deeply unsettling one that will make you question, where does love end and cruelty begin? Listen closely and brace yourself, because the truth in this story is far scarier than anything you could imagine. Chapter 1: The Pageant Legacy and Family Pressure. I still remember the feeling the first time I realized that my sister Sarah was going to push her daughter into the world of pageants. This wasn't just an ordinary competition. It was something our entire family, especially my mother, always treated as a measure of worth and reputation. Sarah had been forced into pageants since she was a child, and thanks to her natural beauty, she often won. But when she became pregnant at 18, her body changed, and that dream had to end. But for Sarah, the dream didn't stop. It simply shifted to the next generation, her daughter. From the moment the little girl could walk, Sarah began training her as if preparing her for an invaluable crown. Oversized high heels, floor-length dresses, a perfectly upright posture like a 4-year-old little Queen Victoria, everything was meticulously arranged. I watched the child and felt a chill run down my spine, realizing this was no longer just child's play. When the girl was 5, her father, Sarah's husband, decided to divorce. The reason was that Sarah had taken their daughter to a competition without consulting him while he was away on a business trip. He came back to find Sarah scolding their daughter for coming in second. But Sarah twisted every possible lie to gain custody. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I step in earlier? The truth is, I had been working abroad for 2 years and had no idea of the dark path the child was being forced down. Everything only became clear to me when the girl turned 10. She had won a regional competition and was registered for a larger pageant that gathered all the most beautiful girls. Sarah, as usual, poured every ounce of energy and strictness into preparing her daughter. The girl was allowed less than 800 calories a day, wore exercise outfits like sauna suits for hours on end, and had to take countless supplements I had never even seen anyone use before. I heard that the girl had once collapsed begging for the training to end, but Sarah silently pointed to the treadmill, forcing her to continue. I only realized the true cruelty when Sarah called me on the phone, talking about the amazing news from the competition. At the time, I thought she was referring to a party or some celebration. I rushed back to the country after a 16-hour flight and arrived at the airport not to find her waiting, but her father, a man I had never spoken to before. He took me to the hospital, and what I saw froze me in place. The girl lay in a hospital bed, her skin pale as paper veins, standing out arms thin as threads, hooked up to IVs in critical condition. Her father wept uncontrollably, a 6'5" man, usually so stoic, now crumbled under the weight of his grief. I didn't know what to do, except stand there and comfort him. As he recounted everything, I finally understood. 3 days before the competition, Sarah had completely cut off her daughter's food, only water. And a few hours before stepping on stage, she handed her a handful of strong diuretics. Do you know what these do? They dehydrate the body and can cause fatal arrhythmias. When the girl stepped onto the stage, exhausted under the blazing lights, her heart nearly stopped. She collapsed, falling from a 3-foot height, luckily only spraining her neck. But that was a small miracle in this tragedy. And Sarah? No one knew where she was. She had completely disappeared at this decisive moment. Her father, the biological father, had to receive an urgent call from the hospital and fly back immediately. I stood by my niece's bed, holding her hand, looking at the bones protruding through her thin skin, and felt a surge of rage. If we found Sarah, I didn't even want to imagine what would happen to her. For me, that was the moment everything changed. I realized this wasn't just a competition or a family dispute. This was a series of manipulative, oppressive, and abusive behaviors disguised under the sweet veneer of pageantry. And from that moment on, I knew I had to act not just for my niece, but for the truth that had to be exposed. Chapter 2: Extreme Pressure Under the Spotlight. The day after I saw my niece in the hospital, everything became clearer. Sarah wasn't just strict. She had turned her daughter into a living tool to fulfill her own pageant dreams. I began digging into the details of the training and diet regimen the girl had been subjected to. The girl, only 10 years old, was forced to train for hours on end in sauna suits, even though her small body was already exhausted. Every time she collapsed or begged to stop, it was dismissed. Every step on the treadmill, every jump had to meet the standards Sarah had set. There were no breaks, no negotiations, just calorie counts, training hours, and the perfection Sarah imagined. Food was another nightmare. Sarah limited her to less than 800 calories a day, and in the days leading up to competitions, she cut food entirely, allowing only water. The girl often lay collapsed in her room, hands clenching her waist, trying to summon the strength to continue. I was told that many times she quietly cried, but Sarah didn't care. Everything was only about a beautiful body, a perfect body, regardless of her daughter's health or mental state. 3 days before stepping onto the stage, Sarah took an even more extreme measure. She gave her a handful of strong diuretics, causing severe dehydration. Even people familiar with medicine would know that such a dose could be fatal. And then, under the blazing stage lights, her exhausted body nearly gave out, her heart almost stopping. She collapsed, fell, and though she was lucky to avoid serious injury, both her spirit and body were pushed to the most dangerous limits. During this time, I realized something horrifying. Sarah wasn't just using cruel measures to achieve results. She was also hiding everything. When her father returned to the country, she was absent, nowhere to be seen. At the hospital, no explanations given. She even tried to construct the image of a devoted, concerned mother. In this way, Sarah created a network of control social media friends, family. Everyone believed in the mother tested by fate. I stood by my niece's bed, holding her hand, looking at the bones protruding through her thin skin, and realized that my efforts from this point forward would not only be about protecting her from physical danger, but also about fighting to expose the truth in front of an entire system built on manipulation and lies. At that moment, I made a vow to myself: no one would be allowed to continue hurting my niece. And to make that happen, I had to prepare to confront Sarah, the law, and even the biases of the community, all the people she had deceived with her perfect facade. Chapter 3: The Legal Battle and Hidden Evidence. After my niece stabilized temporarily in the hospital, I realized that saving her life alone was not enough. Sarah was still above the law, and she was busy reinforcing her devoted mother image in the eyes of the family, the community, and child protective services. I needed to gather evidence to expose the truth, but everything had been meticulously hidden. The first thing I did was examine the items at the scene: the pageant dresses, shoes, training equipment. Everything was under Sarah's control. There was no way I could touch anything without it being seen as tampering with evidence. Every action had to be carefully calculated to avoid raising suspicion. I realized I had to make use of all external sources: teachers, coaches, friends, and anyone who had witnessed Sarah's behavior. I reached out to my niece's teacher. Fortunately, she had kept student logs recording changes in health, weight, and anxiety behaviors before practices and pageant events. Warning emails that Sarah had ignored became crucial evidence. This showed clearly that the danger wasn't a one-off incident, it was a recurring pattern that lasted for months. Next, I investigated social media. Sarah, to maintain her image, always posted loving mother updates on schedule, but inconsistencies began to appear. I found comments from other pageant parents and images posted earlier or later than the claimed times, proving manipulation in her schedule and concealment of coercive behaviors. But collecting evidence wasn't simple. Sarah was clever. She anticipated every possibility. Phones, computers, video records, they were deleted, altered, or hidden. I had to work with Brian's brother, who had tech skills, to recover deleted videos from the pageant cloud. The recovered footage showed my niece being forced to train nonstop, starved and pressured by Sarah's strict verbal commands. Each clip became a piece of the puzzle proving systematic abuse. The more I gathered, the more I understood the extent of the danger. It wasn't just physical. My niece's mental state had also been severely affected. Every meeting with CPS, every explanation about her condition became a trap where my words could be misinterpreted or turned into evidence against me. Sarah had planned meticulously, creating a network to protect herself and conceal her actions. I had no choice but to use every resource, every skill, and all the courage I had to fight against the intricate system Sarah had built. Every step had to be measured, contacting teachers, collecting logs, authenticating videos, preparing court testimony. One misstep could collapse the entire effort, leaving my niece vulnerable once again. And as I compiled all the evidence, one truth became clear. Sarah loved her child, but that love had warped into obsession and control. She believed everything she did was for her daughter's benefit, but in reality, she had placed her child in life-threatening situations. This was no longer a simple mother-daughter issue. It was a legal battle, a fight for child protection, and a struggle against the manipulation of a mother obsessed with her past and her ambitions. Chapter 4. The Tense. Courtroom. Truth confronts the performance. The day of the final trial arrived. The air in the courtroom was heavy, suffocating with tension. Sarah appeared flawless in appearance, dressed simply but neatly, hair tied back, every detail carefully calculated to project the image of a devoted mother facing hardship. She sat with her lawyers and supporters, eyes fixed on us, as if predicting every move I would make. I stepped into the room, hands gripping documents, files of videos, and medical evidence meticulously prepared. The pressure was overwhelming. Every gaze was on me, family, teachers, medical staff, other pageant parents, even the press. Every heartbeat, every breath could be scrutinized, and every small action could be misinterpreted. The trial began with Sarah's lawyers presenting their case. They described her as a misunderstood mother trying to push her daughter toward success in a competitive environment, while a distant relative exploited the situation to sabotage the family. Their words were a smokescreen, making it difficult for anyone unfamiliar with the truth to discern reality. When it was my turn to speak, I stayed calm, speaking naturally and focusing on the facts. The brutal training regime, calorie restriction, the use of diuretics, the ignored warnings documented in notes and emails. I presented the recovered pageant videos, scene by scene, showing the courtroom a clear pattern of systematic abuse, not just a random incident. Witnesses began to appear. The pediatrician testified about the health risks, highlighting the dangers of severe dehydration and calorie restriction. A nutrition expert detailed the long-term physical and developmental consequences. A child psychologist confirmed the psychological impact on my niece, especially being forced to comply with a training schedule that pushed her to exhaustion. Sarah started her rebuttal. She cried at precisely the right moments, her voice trembling but controlled, describing her sacrifices and love for her daughter. Her team argued that everything she did fell within the normal bounds of pageant life, painting me as paranoid, haunted by my absence over the past 2 years. Every statement I made was examined, twisted to question my motives, but the medical evidence and videos were undeniable. The court clerk played each clip, showing my niece exhausted, pale, crying, and begging to stop, yet Sarah continued to push her. The room went silent. Even the most seasoned pageant parents couldn't directly contest what they saw on the screen. Teachers and medical staff presented the warnings they had sent, repeatedly ignored by Sarah. They explained the symptoms my niece had shown, the red flags that had been overlooked, and their concerns for her physical and mental safety. Emails and logs were read into evidence, slowly dismantling the image of the selfless mother. When Sarah took the stand, she tried to defend herself with love and sacrifice. but confronted with data messages, emails, and videos, her voice faltered. Occasionally, she was silent. Other times, her answers were evasive. The court's patience tested every detail. Each time I emphasized the life-threatening risks, the courtroom became so quiet you could hear your own heartbeat. Finally, when CPS presented their comprehensive report and risk assessment, the truth emerged. This was a deliberate, dangerous pattern of abuse capable of causing death if continued. The court acknowledged the evidence and concluded that while Sarah believed she was acting in her daughter's best interest, the warped nature of her love had placed the child in serious danger. At the end of the trial, the judge issued a temporary ruling custody would be granted to the father, with Brian and me supervising in his absence. Sarah was required to complete psychological therapy, attend parenting courses, and only have supervised contact until proven safe. This decision ensured the child's immediate safety while allowing Sarah the opportunity to address her behavior without being completely removed from her daughter's life. The trial concluded, and the tension in the room slowly eased, but the fallout from this drama lingered. Everyone understood that this was not a victory for one side alone. It was the first step in rescuing my niece from a cycle of abuse while offering hope for recovery and safe reintegration for the entire family. Chapter 5: Recovery and the First Steps Toward Freedom. After the tense courtroom drama, my niece was brought home to her father under the supervision of Brian and me. The atmosphere in the house was initially heavy, oppressive, but also for the first time in years, it felt safe. She looked around her newly arranged room, purple walls, a ceiling dotted with glowing stars, simple choices yet powerful symbols of freedom, of having a say in her own life. On the first day, she couldn't do much with confidence. Every meal was carefully calculated to restore her physical health. The very first meal after weeks of food scarcity was a plate of bread, eggs, and fruit. She looked at it like it was magic. I remember the mix of curiosity and fear in her eyes as she picked up a spoon for the first time, and I sat beside her, gently encouraging each bite. That first evening, she sobbed quietly, telling me about the pain, the pressure to be beautiful, perfect, and to please her mother. I listened without judgment, just holding her hand tightly, reminding her that no one could ever force her to do anything against her will again. Brian stood nearby, silent, but fully supportive. For the first time, she felt love without pressure, a safety she had never known. The following days were challenging. She was still haunted by the habits of strict training and dieting that had been imposed on her. Every time she saw the treadmill or a scale, fear flashed in her eyes. We had to establish new routines, from eating enough, getting proper sleep, to playing and participating in ordinary childhood activities. Small steps, but absolutely crucial. She began to open up when allowed to choose her clothes, colors, and games. I realized that freedom wasn't just about physical safety, but also about having the right to make choices, to feel control over her own life. Every small decision, painting her room, picking her favorite food, choosing afternoon activities, was a major step in her psychological recovery. At school, she received special attention from her teachers. Brian and I met with them regularly to track her progress and ensure she wasn't pressured or treated differently. At first, she was shy, unwilling to talk about pageants or her mother, but gradually, she began to share her fears and lingering traumas. We encouraged her to keep a journal, using colors and drawings to express her emotions, a gentle way to help rebuild her confidence and trust in herself. In the first few weeks, nightmares still appeared, waking her in tears during the night. I would sit by her side, calming her and helping her regain composure. Each time reminded me that recovery wasn't a straight line, but a zigzag journey. Yet every step was progress. She started engaging in light outdoor activities, learning to swim, and playing with children her age, things that had been restricted before. Laughter returned to the house, small but meaningful. Every smile was a victory, evidence that love without coercion could heal the soul. Brian and I also had to learn how to balance our roles, protecting her while allowing her the freedom to explore. None of us wanted to impose, but sometimes our worry made us rigid. Gradually, patience and companionship helped the family regain a normal rhythm step by step. In the months that followed, her recovery was monitored by doctors, psychologists, and child welfare officers. We established structured meals, daily routines, and recreational activities to ensure she was nurtured both physically and emotionally. Every medical checkup, every therapy session was an opportunity to evaluate her progress and adjust our support methods. She gradually began to understand that love doesn't always come with pressure or fear. Simple joys, learning, playing, being recognized for who she truly was, rather than her achievements or appearance, became the motivation for her to open up and find happiness again. Finally, those first steps toward freedom, however small, became a solid foundation for full recovery. Brian and I learned that protecting a child isn't just about ensuring safety. It's about guiding them to rediscover their self-worth, to live a true childhood, and to understand that they deserve to be loved not for accomplishments, but simply for who they are. Chapter 6: The Legal Battle and Strict Supervision. After the first few weeks of recovery, we entered another challenging phase. Ensuring her safety wasn't just physical, but also legal. Authorities from Child Protective Services to lawyers were all involved, but Sarah, her mother, kept trying to maintain control through the law and her social network. Every step we took had to be carefully considered because even a small misstep could be exploited by her. The court granted temporary custody to her father, with me allowed to assist during his business trips. This provided stability in daily life, but also brought its own challenges. Sarah began planning a meticulous legal strategy, using lawyers and documentation to present herself as a devoted mother constrained by circumstances. Every statement, every photo or video was prepared to defend her methods and to counter anyone questioning her parenting. We faced pressure not only from Sarah, but also from those around us. Some family members were too afraid to confront her and chose to stay silent, leaving us to prove the truth without damaging delicate relationships. I vividly remember the first time I saw her after the court's temporary ruling. Her eyes were a mix of fear and curiosity, as if testing whether the world outside was really safe. She still needed regular medical monitoring. Every checkup was not only a chance to track her health, but also critical legal evidence. Doctors and psychologists assessed her weight, nutrition, stress, and trauma indicators, ensuring that any decisions regarding Sarah's custody or visitation were based on concrete data. We also had to contend with Sarah's media strategy. On social media, she posted images portraying herself as a dedicated mother, casting the story in a misleading light. Every comment, every post could be used to influence court or agency opinions. We had to carefully separate appearances from reality while building irrefutable evidence: health logs, workout videos, school records, and psychological reports. Every move was a mental chess game. We coordinated with lawyers, doctors, and teachers to ensure that every action was legally sound, protecting her while maintaining the evidentiary value of our efforts. Daily, I had to evaluate whether school visits, activity monitoring, or collecting legal information posed any risk. Meanwhile, she gradually adapted to her new environment. Old habits were eliminated. No strict diets, no unreasonable exercise pressure. Instead, she engaged in normal activities supporting both her physical recovery and mental well-being. I remember the moment she chose the color of her room, played with toys, laughed with friends. Simple acts, yet full of the power of freedom and self-determination. Legally, hearings were ongoing. We presented evidence, step by step, videos, photos, medical records, teacher reports, and expert evaluations. Sarah countered with positive evidence, emphasizing her dedication and love. It was a battle of wits where every testimony and piece of evidence was scrutinized meticulously. I realized that our goal wasn't just to protect her from Sarah's potential harm, but also to maintain balance so her psychological well-being wasn't compromised. Decisions about custody supervision or visitation restrictions had to focus on her best interests, not revenge or a sense of justice. The following weeks combined medical, legal, and psychological supervision. She continued therapy, learned to eat and live normally, and gradually adapted to having autonomy and the ability to say no to inappropriate demands. Brian and I constantly adjusted plans, monitored every change, and were ready to respond if Sarah took any unexpected action. Chapter 6 ends on a hopeful note. She no longer panicked at the sight of a treadmill, or Scale began eating properly, and little by little her confidence returned. At the same time, the court and supervisory agencies began recognizing clear evidence of abuse, opening the door to long-term changes in custody. Chapter 7: The Court Hearing and the Battle of Evidence. The day of the first court hearing arrived, and the tension in the room was palpable. I walked in and saw Sarah sitting there with her team of lawyers and supporters, a cold smile on her face, yet full of confidence. She still appeared as the devoted mother, her gaze gentle, every gesture calculated to win the favor of the judge. Every detail was carefully prepared to overshadow the truth of what she had done to her child. The hearing began with Sarah's lawyer presenting her case. They painted a picture of her as a resilient mother pressured by circumstances, while portraying me as the absent sister preoccupied with my own life, suddenly showing up to disrupt the family's happiness. I caught a few skeptical looks from some members of the panel, but I knew I had to remain calm. Then it was our turn. Brian and I presented our evidence. We started with medical records, weight, height, malnutrition status, and the dangerous levels of diuretics previously found in her system. Pediatricians, nutritionists, and cardiologists testified one by one, confirming the real risks she had endured. Every statement, every number, every image was like a pin piercing the perfect facade Sarah had built. Next, videos and photos retrieved by Brian from cloud backups were shown. They captured moments of her being forced to train until exhaustion severely restricted eating and walking on stage in a state of physical collapse. These videos didn't just demonstrate physical abuse, they highlighted the psychological pressure a 10-year-old child was forced to endure. Sarah tried to dismiss the evidence, claiming it was all part of preparing for competitions in the harsh world of pageants. But when experts analyzed the intensity and duration of the training combined with teachers' reports and psychological counseling records, her argument began to crumble. The panel listened to every testimony, every technical analysis, and every statement from doctors and teachers. I stayed composed, sharing what I observed when I saw her exhausted, crying, pleading for a break, and how Sarah constantly forced her to continue. Every detail was presented truthfully, without adding personal emotion, yet the cruelty became undeniably clear. As Sarah answered cross-examination, the tension in the room intensified by the minute. She continued her performance, voice trembling, tears falling at the right moments, but when confronted with irrefutable evidence, her confidence began to fade. The panel noticed discrepancies between her statements and the actual data. Finally, her teacher and witnesses from the pageant community testified. They confirmed hearing her complain about being forced to eat, too little overtrain, and worry about her body. These testimonies were objective, unrelated to personal feelings, and carried significant weight in court. Hours passed. I felt the weight of the responsibility on my shoulders, but I remained resolute. Every video, email, and statement was carefully organized, demonstrating a systematic pattern of abuse rather than random incidents. Sarah looked at me, her gaze shifting from confidence to fear, realizing her control was slipping away. When the presentation of evidence concluded, my lawyer outlined our proposal: temporary custody granted to her father with me supervising, mandatory therapy for Sarah, along with strict supervision before any visitation rights, protective measures for her nutrition, health, and mental well-being, and limited authority for Sarah in pageant-related decisions. The panel called for silence, stating they would review all evidence before making a decision. I left the courtroom with a mix of tension and hope. This was a pivotal moment. For the first time, justice and truth had a real chance to prevail in the battle Sarah had so meticulously orchestrated. Chapter 8: The Final Verdict and the First Steps Toward Peace. The day of the final verdict arrived, and I woke up with a mix of anxiety and heaviness in my chest. When I stepped into the courtroom, the tension was so thick, it felt like it could be cut with a knife. Sarah was there impeccably dressed, wearing a soft smile but with a cunning glint in her eyes, confident she still controlled the situation. Her supporters sat neatly around her, creating the perfect picture of a devoted mother, making the pressure on me feel heavier than ever. My lawyer began presenting all of our evidence, again medical records, doctor reports, videos of her being forced to train letters and emails between teachers, and Sarah, all proving a months-long pattern of abuse. The panel listened intently, every video, every testimony, shedding more light on the truth Sarah had tried so hard to conceal. Sarah fought back fiercely, arguing that it was all preparation for pageants, a highly competitive environment, and that she only wanted her daughter to succeed. But each piece of evidence, every statement from doctors, teachers, nutritionists, and psychologists dismantled her argument. The unanimous support of witnesses, combined with technical data from videos and training schedules, left her with no room for defense. I could see fear slowly creeping into Sarah's eyes. She realized that every plan she had carefully orchestrated, every subtle form of control had been exposed. Every detail in the files clearly proved that her daughter had been forced to overtrain, severely restricted in nutrition, and subjected to unbearable psychological pressure, and all of it directly caused by her mother. The panel took a brief recess to deliberate. The room was silent, broken only by the sound of flipping pages, and it felt like even my heartbeat had paused. When they returned, I stood there holding my breath, watching every movement. The decision was read aloud. Temporary custody was granted to her father, with me supervising when he was away. Sarah was required to undergo mandatory therapy, complete parenting skill classes, and remain under strict supervision before any limited visitation rights were allowed. Her authority over pageant-related decisions was completely restricted. The panel emphasized that every measure was to ensure the child's physical and psychological safety and recovery. As the announcement echoed through the room, I felt a wave of relief, but also the weight of the consequences that remained. Sarah lowered her head, her confidence gone, eyes revealing disappointment and anger. She understood that her control had been stripped away, yet her emotional attachment to her daughter remained a tangled mix of love, guilt, and rage. After the hearing, we returned to the hospital. Watching my niece open her eyes and recognize her father and me, I saw a faint smile, the first sign of hope. The weeks following the verdict were a slow process of recovery. She had to relearn how to eat, normally sleep properly, and most importantly, feel safe again. Sarah began her therapy program. At first, she resisted, insisting she had been misunderstood, but gradually, faced with irrefutable evidence and expert analysis, she began to recognize the profound harm her actions had caused her daughter. The therapy sessions were designed to help her distinguish genuine love from extreme pressure and expectations, laying the groundwork to rebuild a safe relationship in the future. Our family gradually adjusted to the new circumstances. Some relatives remained neutral, some chose to support the child, but every decision centered on her safety and well-being. I saw clearly that protecting her meant more than safeguarding her body. It meant preserving her childhood, her right to make choices, and her right to live without extreme pressure. Watching her perform in the school talent show, choosing her own outfit and song, I realized it was the first time she could truly live as a child. No pressure, no expectations, just simple joy. I understood that the real victory wasn't taking Sarah down, it was restoring childhood safety and happiness for my niece. Chapter 8 ends with the image of her laughing and running freely around the living room surrounded by our newly established family. I knew the road to full recovery was long, but for the first time, real hope had appeared. Chapter 9: The First Week of Recovery and Rebuilding Safety. The first days after the court ruling were tense, but also filled with hope. My niece was picked up by her father and I became her supervisor whenever he was away. Everything had to be carefully planned: meal times, sleep times, study times, play times, all calculated to create a sense of safety and stability. On the very first day, she was still extremely fearful. When she saw me, her eyes held a mix of joy and worry. She asked about every little detail from her meals to familiar objects to make sure nothing posed a threat. I held her hand and emphasized that now she had the right to say no to anything uncomfortable and that we would always respect her feelings. Mealtimes were the biggest challenge. She had been used to a strict regimen, sometimes only drinking water and overtraining. We started with small, nutritious portions, gradually helping her see that food was a friend, not an enemy. Every successful meal, even just a bit of fruit or a bowl of soup, was a small victory. Study and playtime also had to be adjusted. She was still anxious about everything related to pageants, costumes, rehearsals, competitions. I told her that now she could choose what she wanted to do. We read books, colored played games, simple, ordinary activities that had become precious joys. Gradually, her smile appeared more often, and her eyes showed less fear. Therapy sessions with a child specialist began. We learned to recognize feelings of fear and anxiety, and practiced breathing exercises and ways to express our needs. At first, she was hesitant, but seeing her father and me by her side, she slowly trusted us and opened up. We called this her safe time, a space where she could be heard without fear of punishment or pressure. Interactions with her mother, Sarah, were strictly supervised. Visits were allowed only under controlled conditions, with the requirement that she follow court and specialist guidelines. My niece was apprehensive, but also curious. She asked about her mother, why visits had to be supervised. I explained simply, Mom is learning how to be a better parent, and you will be safe the entire time. Each passing week, she recovered a little more. Every laugh, every meal finished, every moment of free play, without fear, was proof that proper care was transforming her life. I documented each progress, both to track her development and to provide evidence that her new environment was safe and healthy. The relationship with her mother remained a psychological challenge. Sarah still had to complete therapy, attend parenting classes, and remain under supervision. But step by step during each supervised visit, my niece learned to set boundaries, and Sarah learned to respect them. We encouraged both of them to communicate through safe words and gestures, rebuilding trust gradually. The entire family was learning to adapt. Relatives who had previously turned away due to misunderstandings began to observe and support while always respecting my niece's choices and feelings. The household remained tense, but there were moments of peace. Family dinners, storytelling, laughter, simple things that had become more precious than ever. Chapter 9 ends with the image of my niece, sitting in a chair, coloring in the afternoon light with her father and me beside her. She smiled, not because she had to win or meet any standards, but because she was free, because she could be herself. The first steps on the road to recovery had been taken, and I knew that though many challenges lay ahead, we were moving in the right direction: safety, love, and freedom for her childhood. Chapter 10: Supervised Visits and Psychological Progress. The first supervised visit took place at a community center designated by the court. The room was spacious, filled with natural light with chairs arranged in a circle, all designed to create a sense of safety for my niece. I was there along with Brian and a court-appointed supervisor ready to support whenever needed. She entered gripping my hand tightly, her eyes cautiously studying her mother. Sarah appeared dressed neatly, but she couldn't hide her tension. She knew that every gesture would be observed, recorded, and could directly impact future visitation rights. When mother and daughter saw each other, there was a moment of silence, lasting several seconds. My niece didn't run to hug her mother like other children, nor did she cry. She just stood still, waiting for a signal from me. I gently said, You can say hello, then take a seat. Everything will be okay. Sarah sat down, forcing a smile. She started talking about small neutral things, the weather school activities, her favorite foods, but her voice wavered whenever pageants were mentioned. My niece listened but kept her distance. Brian and I, along with the supervisor, carefully observed every expression, every gesture. Every reaction, no matter how small, carried meaning. During the first 20 minutes, my niece experimented with setting boundaries. She said, "Mom, I don't want to talk about practice or my weight." Sarah was a bit startled, but quickly regained her composure, nodded, and changed the topic. For the first time, she truly respected her daughter's wishes. A quiet sense of victory spread across the room. We encouraged Sarah to use positive reinforcement instead of pressure. When she praised my niece for her patience and creativity while coloring, my niece smiled genuinely without any forced expression. It was the first time in months I saw her eyes light up like a normal child's, free from fear and obligation. Subsequent visits gradually increased in length. My niece learned to express her feelings, fear joy, or when she didn't want to do something. Sarah also learned to recognize her daughter's limits and listen instead of commanding. We documented every progress, providing the court with a clear picture of the changes taking place. Alongside the visits, my niece began weekly therapy sessions. The focus was on coping skills, recognizing signs of stress under pressure, and most importantly, building self-confidence and a sense of personal worth. She began to understand that not every action had to please her mother, and that her own feelings and health were just as important. At home, daily routines were adjusted to support recovery. Meals were nutritious, playtime was free, and there was no pressure to study or dress up for performances. She chose her own clothes, toys, and activities, experiencing for the first time in her life the right to make her own decisions. Small moments like picking the color for her bedroom walls or deciding the evening meal became symbols of control over her own life. The family gradually introduced discussions about emotion spaces where everyone could share thoughts without judgment. Sarah attended mandatory therapy and slowly realized that love cannot be transformed into pressure. She learned to love her child without forcing compliance, rebuilding the mother-daughter relationship step by step on a foundation of safety and respect. Chapter 10 ends with the image of my niece, sitting at the table coloring and smiling with her father and me beside her. She still felt a bit anxious when thinking about her mother, but she now knew how to set boundaries and protect herself. This was the first step in a long recovery journey, a balance between protection and rebuilding the mother-child bond between safety and love. Chapter 11: Legal Consequences and Long-Term Supervision. After the supervised visits and the initial stages of recovery, the next step was addressing the legal matters. The court decided to maintain strict supervision over Sarah without fully revoking her parental rights to protect the mother-daughter bond while ensuring absolute safety for my niece. My niece now lived with her father Brian, with me acting as temporary guardian whenever he was at work. Every action Sarah took was closely monitored by the court-appointed supervisor, and the court required regular reports on her psychological progress and compliance with regulations. Even minor violations could directly affect future visitation rights. Sarah began a long-term therapy program focusing on personality disorders, her obsession with perfection, and her controlling tendencies over her child. She had to learn how to transform love into support rather than pressure, and recognize the harmful behaviors that had affected my niece. This was by no means easy. Every week presented new challenges for her, but the therapy sessions gradually brought small changes. She listened without overreacting, acknowledged my niece's feelings, and learned to praise instead of dictate. Meanwhile, my niece, alongside her psychological therapy, began participating in social and physical activities of her choosing, from dance classes and painting to book clubs aimed at rebuilding confidence and rediscovering joy. In the early days, she remained shy and fearful when interacting with others, but slowly smiles returned, her eyes lit up, and she began expressing her thoughts without fear of judgment or punishment. Subsequent court sessions became opportunities to consolidate the legal process. Doctors, psychologists, teachers, and witnesses who provided evidence of abuse were called to confirm the entire process. Images and videos were authenticated by technical experts, proving that the restrictive eating forced practices and use of diuretics had been intentional and systematic. These records reinforced the court's decision to maintain strict supervision over Sarah. However, this process wasn't just a legal journey, it was a psychological battle for the entire family. Some relatives still questioned my credibility, while others sided with Sarah, believing she had been misunderstood. Internal conflicts required me to be extremely cautious in every action, from communicating with legal authorities to protecting my niece at home. Every decision had to be carefully considered. A single mistake could expose her to continued harm. Sarah gradually realized that the power she once held over her child had been limited, and she needed to demonstrate change through actions rather than words. Weekly supervision, regular reporting, and therapy sessions became opportunities to prove that she could parent in a healthy, supportive way. My niece, in turn, learned to recognize negative behavior and use her voice to protect herself. Chapter 11 ends with the image of a supervised visit where mother and daughter interact cautiously but genuinely. My niece smiles as her mother encourages her to color a picture, and Sarah smiles back, this time without pressure or commands. It was the first step toward a new kind of relationship, a balance between protection, legal responsibility, and the possibility of emotional recovery. Chapter 12: Recovery and Rebuilding. Life. 3 weeks after the court session, my niece's life began to stabilize. Her room at her father's house was decorated exactly how she wanted: soft purple walls, a ceiling dotted with glow-in-the-dark stars, a little universe where each night she could look up and feel free after years of pressure from beauty pageants. No more restrictions, no more weight-related demands. She was allowed to eat normally and choose her own activities. Her first day back at school was a challenge. She was shy, hesitant, worried about judgmental glances, and fearful of the same pressures she had endured before. But with Brian and me supporting her, she gradually gained confidence. We created a calm environment where she could express herself without fear of punishment. Her teacher was guided to notice signs of stress and provide support when needed. Therapy continued to play a crucial role. In each session, she learned to identify her emotions, to understand that not every mistake or flaw would make her mother stop loving her. Day by day, she developed skills to protect herself, to say no when she felt overwhelmed, and to voice her desires without fear of punishment. Creative exercises, painting, storytelling, journaling, became tools for releasing mental pressure and reclaiming her voice. Meanwhile, Sarah continued her mandatory therapy program. Therapists noted slow but definite progress. She began to understand that love didn't mean total control. In sessions, Sarah learned to praise and encourage without imposing rules, to observe her daughter without commanding or comparing her to other children. Every small step Sarah took became a chance for my niece to see that her mother was truly trying to change. The extended family also gradually adapted to the new reality. Some members remained distant, still suspicious of Sarah, while others actively supported my niece and Brian. Family meals became a safe space for ordinary conversations, school hobbies, funny moments of the day. No pressure, no competitions, just family warmth and the peace my niece had never experienced before. Supervised visits continued. Initially tense for both mother and daughter, these encounters eventually became opportunities to learn healthy interactions. My niece recognized her mother's limits and fears. Sarah realized her daughter needed freedom and to be heard. Moments of laughter, gentle hugs, even shared silences became meaningful steps in mending their relationship. Her physical health improved quickly. Doctors guided a balanced diet paired with light physical activities she enjoyed. Her complexion brightened, her bones no longer protruded sharply, and her eyes sparkled with life. Seeing her recovery, both Brian and I felt immense relief. yet remained vigilant. Any sign of pressure or coercion had to be addressed immediately. Normal life gradually became routine. She participated in art classes, read books, played sports according to her abilities and interests. No more long dresses, high heels, or strict diets, only childhood joy, freedom of choice, and safe love from her father and family. Chapter 12 ends with the image of my niece standing on the elementary school stage, performing her talent show act. She chose to sing, wearing her favorite dress, free and unrestrained. Brian recorded it on his phone. I sat in the audience, and her smile lit up the room. She had finally found her voice, her joy, and the right to be a normal child. This was the beginning of a life she could choose for herself, learning to balance love and safety expectations and freedom. And that's the full story, a heartbreaking journey from power, ambition, and cruelty to protection, justice, and the chance to heal. This story reminds us that sometimes love can become dangerous, and protecting the innocent often requires the hardest decisions. If this story moved you or left you unsettled, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to True Reddit Reads so you don't miss the next real-life story told in the voices of those who once stayed silent. And remember, sometimes the scariest stories aren't fiction, they're real life.